From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to Paul Murray Live. The great man Paul is enjoying the holiday and has asked me to come step in to fill his very large shoes. Great to be here. And speaking of holidays, can I just say to everyone out there, Happy Easter. And whether you're celebrating the Bible or the bunny, I hope you had a great day. Now, I'm sure they also had a great time over at the ABC, of course, where, well, they always seem like a real barrel of fun. But yet, for some reason, they can't even bring themselves to say the word Easter. Not even when it's in the context of an event like the Sydney Royal Easter Show. Or as this ABC radio presenter had it just the other day, simply the show.
So the bison's there, and also some trick riding going on at the show. So we'll hope to bring all the action from the show to you next week. We'll be broadcasting there for 4 days from the show. And a very good afternoon. Welcome to the Country Hour, broadcasting again from the Royal Show. And today we're at the wood chopping event. So if it's a little bit noisy in the background, that's the reason why. Joined here by Josh Becker. So fantastic day for the show.
Oh, perfect day for the show. It's blue skies.
Great day for the show, and thanks, by the way, to Ray Hadley for first picking up on this. Now, in ABC world, of course, the phrase Sydney Royal Easter Show is like a trifecta of problematic words. Think about it. Easter, Royal, even Sydney. All of these things would be enough to give an Ultimo dweller hives. Surely the ABC would prefer the event be called something like, I don't know, the Gadigal Lands of the Eora Nation Republic March Holiday Season Event instead. Yeah, you think I'm kidding, but truly this whole thing with the holidays right now is getting out of hand. And it's not just the ABC. When it comes to Easter, there is a global push on to cancel the event and replace it with, well, I'll tell you about that in just a second. Because, for example, in Canada, just to take one example, the Department of Veterans Affairs has wished everyone, yes, as I suggested before, a happy March holiday season. Because, of course, you can't say Easter in Fidel Jr.'s Canada, can you? And this is before we get to reports of so-called gesture eggs rather than Easter eggs being sold in the UK, and so on and so forth. There's so many of these things I could tell you. But if we're into, or if we're not celebrating Easter anymore, the question then is, with the left pushing against it, what do they propose replacing this sacred holiday with? Well, let's ask the White House, shall we? Yes, there we have it. It's now, you got it, Transgender Day of Visibility, don't you know? Now, sorry, you never heard of Trans Visibility Day? Well, guess what? Neither had I. But apparently it's a long-standing holiday. It's been in business for a whole 15 years now. That's right. And I don't know how it works, but I think what happens then is if Dylan Mulvaney comes out on Trans Visibility Day and sees her shadow, well, that means 6 more weeks of Pride Month or something. I don't know. But seriously, though, this Trans Visibility Day, it's a very big deal. It's big enough now to subvert Easter, which is only the most important day in the Christian calendar when more than 2 billion Christians around the globe celebrate the resurrection of Jesus and the conquering of the grave. Now, I know what some people out there are thinking, and hi, Paul Barry, this might be you. Look, it's just a coincidence that Easter and this Trans Day of Visibility fall on the same day. Certainly CNN regime media journalist Brian Stelter tried to pick up this thread and help the White House spin its way out of a controversy that's been raging all weekend, saying, quote, the annual celebration started 15 years ago. The organizer chose the springtime date because she wanted some distance from Transgender Day of Remembrance as well as Pride Month, which is in June. Now, if you ask me, this is an interesting line of defense. Apparently, the fact that Trans Day of Visibility fell on Easter was not because of any sinister attempt, according to Stelter, to replace Easter with a new celebration of sexual diversity, but simply because the calendar was already so crowded that this was the only place it would fit. And indeed, that calendar is crowded with these identity politics events. I mean, just to go through a few of the events the day could have clashed with, well, let's look at the calendar. There's Aromantic Spectrum Awareness Week. There's LGBTQIA plus Health Awareness Week. International Asexuality Day. There's Lesbian Visibility Day, Agender Pride Day, Pansexual and Pan-Romantic Awareness Day. I suspect that's quite the party. Bisexuality Awareness Week. Who knew? International Pronoun Day, then also Asexual Awareness Week, because apparently the single day earlier in the year, not quite enough, and so on and so forth. And someone added up all the days there on that calendar and figured out that there is something like 148 different feast days celebrating, marking, or remembering folks all along the LGBTQI2 Spirit plus spectrum. And it's not just the White House. New York State Governor Kathy Hochul also ordered her state to mark the day, lighting up everything from the Empire State Building to Niagara Falls in the trans colors. A lot different than what they did back in 1956 when they marked Trans Visibility Day, or as it used to be called, Easter, by lighting up the skyline thusly. You get the idea. Now, I don't bring any of this up. I want to be really, really clear about this. I don't want to bring any of this up to give gay or lesbian or trans people any grief or a hard time or anything at all. Just the opposite, because, in fact, many members of these communities find all these awareness days terribly, terribly cringe. But rather, it's worth pointing out the fact that the White House has made such a big deal of the day and proclaimed it for Easter, whether by coincidence or design. The fact they've done this really brings up a much bigger issue, and that is this: the continued assault on tradition by the left, which, like rust, never sleeps and never rests in its quest to undermine and denigrate anything that looks like tradition, particularly Western tradition. And what the slow but steady colonization of the calendar by left-wing affinity groups is actually part of is a much bigger program to replace the things that we had organized our year around, Christmas, Easter, what have you, Australia Day, and replace them with events centered around identity politics. The aim of all this is to get us to stop thinking about things that are traditional or even, dare I say, transcendental, and start thinking, getting us thinking constantly about remaking the world according to the left's term. This isn't a new trick, you know. The French Revolution saw the calendar entirely rewritten. Cambodia's Pol Pot had his Year Zero. The Soviets replaced all the old Orthodox feast days with new communist ones. And because the left is authoritarian by nature, their claims that the right is full of fascists is really just a distraction. They cannot stand alternate or higher sources of truth, such as, well, Christianity or our Judeo-Christian tradition. Indeed, not only did the White House conflate Easter and Trans Day of Visibility, but they also, at the White House Easter egg contest, banned religious themes from Easter egg designs submitted by kids to be held at a contest at the White House. Now, I'm sure Brian Stelter from CNN will be along any minute now to explain why this is just a coincidence in a moment. But the more you look at it, the more it looks like they don't want to knock religion off its pedestal so much as create a whole new woke one. The same people who laugh at people who believe in God or mock the resurrection, though they would never do that with certain other faiths, if you know what I mean, well, these guys, they're trying to make a new religion based on a weird reading of technology and science and biology with its own confession of belief and articles of faith. Remember, these are very super rational people who want you to believe the science, and at the same time want you to believe that men can have babies. Now, you're free to believe that if you like, but me, I'd rather it was kept out of schools. And it is no coincidence that they are in the process of coming after Easter. So, where does this come from? Well, have a look at this guy, Paulo Freire. He was a Brazilian educator whose name is not known much outside education circles, but he had a massive influence and continues to have a massive influence on school curricula around the world, including in Australia. Fiercely left-wing, his doctrines of so-called critical pedagogy are used globally by the left to use the classroom to indoctrinate children and turn them into little revolutionaries. In his 1984 book, Education, Liberation of the Church, Freire wrote, "The old Easter of rhetoric is dead with no hope of resurrection. It is only in the authenticity of historical praxis," that's a fancy code word for Marxism, "that Easter becomes the death that makes life possible." In other words, Easter is only Easter if it celebrates not Christ's and by extension humanity's triumph over the grave, but rather rebirth into wokeness, into woke critical consciousness. This is the new religion of the left, of wokeness trying to create a new paradise here on Earth with results that have been tried over and over again for centuries, always ending in tragedy. Indeed, as someone smarter than I noted, no one can build utopia here without first setting up a cemetery and a jail. Now, let's bring in my panel for this Easter Sunday. James Ashby, running for Queensland Parliament with One Nation. Nicole Flint, who will be recontesting the seat of Boothby at the next federal election, pre-selection notwithstanding. And Christy McSeany, who isn't currently running for any parliamentary office, but is doing great work at the PR Council. Happy Easter to everybody. Thank you all so much for coming in on this glorious Sunday, Easter Sunday. I want to kick off with some of the parliamentary news that we had to deal with this past week, guys, and I want to talk about the Labor government's chaotic detainee legislation that saw the government propose laws that would allow it to ban travelers from countries like Iran that did not take deportees. Here was Foreign Minister Penny Wong on Sky News Sunday Agenda this morning.
This legislation was about making Australia's immigration system stronger. It was about ensuring that people who don't cooperate with a requirement to return can be penalised. And it was about ensuring that we can have a new power to stop granting visas in certain circumstances to those countries who are refusing to have citizens return. Now, obviously, that's a power which would only be exercised where necessary. It's a power which is one tool in the ways in which we seek to manage the immigration system.
Now, guys, I want to talk about this detainee debacle a bit more. I was there in Canberra this week when it all went down. It was amazing seeing Labor get just absolutely rolled by the Liberals, the Greens, the independent crossbench in the Senate, and they were just absolutely knocked down on that. The obvious question is, why are Andrew Giles and Claire O'Neill still in their portfolio? I mean, all they seem to be doing is causing embarrassment and headaches for their Prime Minister. Nicole, let's start with you.
Well, I think the nation would love an answer from Prime Minister Anthony Albanese as to why Ministers Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles are still in their portfolios when they are clearly incapable of managing their departments, of managing the policy. And isn't it so telling that they sent Senator Penny Wong, the Foreign Affairs Minister, out to attempt to defend their chaotic handling of migration and detainee system that's been a rolling mess since last June? They've sent Penny Wong out because Giles and O'Neill are in hiding, James. Now, I don't know if you were part of the press gallery pack that was chasing Claire O'Neill around this week, but apparently she's sort of up to about 2 press conferences that she's refused to answer questions at. So, you know, enough is enough. This is just disastrous for the Prime Minister. I mean, good for all of us who do not support Labor's policies or handling of this entire disastrous mess. But this isn't good for the nation, and the Prime Minister needs to act. And he can't hide behind Penny Wong being out there trying to defend the indefensible.
Yeah, no, look, I missed those press conferences. I think I was down at Aussie's doing the real business of the nation, Nicole. But James Ashby, let me come to you on this one here, because it seems to me that what happened with this legislation is they screwed it up with the NZYQ and they didn't do anything. And then they tried to come across too hard on this and wedge the coalition and, you know, make them look like they were on the back foot. What's your reading on this? And can those two ministers really keep going in their portfolio?
Well, no. But the thing is, the Labor Party don't make these decisions. The factions and the unions make the decisions on who keeps portfolios within the Labor ministry. But the biggest issue here, James, is the fact that the Labor Party had this legislation weeks before we returned to Parliament last week. They made no attempt to consult with either the coalition or the crossbench. They knew the Greens wouldn't go with this legislation. So as far as I'm concerned, the Labor Party are the ones playing politics with this. We know that the Labor Party are laced with unintended consequences when it comes to immigration. If Penny Wong wants to return to Parliament early, I know we've got a 6-week break at the moment. We've got a couple of days off for Easter. Do it, Penny. But if you're going to be serious about this, how about we just tear up the 1951 UN Convention on Refugees? Because let's be honest, it is so out of date. It happened 18 years before even man landed on the moon. That's how old this thing is. And we are being taken for mugs in this country by people who aren't coming here for genuine reasons. They're coming here for economic reasons. They're pretending that they're changing religion or they're changing sexuality. Look, unless they've got an OnlyFans site that we can judge on whether they've genuinely turned gay or lesbian or whatever it might be, there is no definitive response that these people can give that says that they are gay or they are of Christianity now and stopping them from going back to these Islamic countries. Let's have a look at the countries in which they're coming from. Let's get out of the 1951 Convention here on refugees. Nicole, you want to go back into federal politics. Would you support the coalition abolishing the rules that we signed up to in 1951, and let's just set our own standards when it comes to immigration? You want to get back into politics. Are you prepared to do that? Because as far as I'm concerned, and so many other people in this country, it's out of date and it's useless.
Well, James, I think you're right that there is going to have to be a big shift on whether or not we talk about this refugee convention, because I think it's being abused. It came up before the whole question of, before we had air travel and all the sort of the mass movements of people. I want to come to Nicole on that question in a second, but Christy McSween, I want to bring you in on this debate here, first of all, because you've been sitting there very patiently for us. Where do you think this is winding up? Because, you know, if you're advising these guys and saying, this is what you need to be telling people, it's very hard if they don't believe what they're selling. And I get the sense, Christy, that Labor, they really ultimately, deep in their DNA, they don't believe in these tough borders and border protection policies.
Look, Labor has never been confident on border policy and immigration policy and making those hard decisions that Australians expect of a government to make decisions around immigration. And the reason for that is Labor is completely hamstrung by the left of its party. Of course, we know that this was the first national conference that Labor had the numbers on the floor. And unlike the coalition, Labor's national conference full of Labor delegates actually needs to be enacted. So the left faction is highly dominant in today's Labor Party, and it is more of a in-fight, political fight. How do they win their pre-selections? By making hard border protection policies. A second point I'd like to make is that John Howard, back in 1995, prior to winning the 1996 election, campaigned significantly around transparency of government decisions, and that was after the Ros Kelly whiteboard affair. And he got a significant amount of traction from Australians who wanted transparent government, who wanted ministers to answer questions, and he had to sack around 6 ministers, I think, in his first or second term, and progressively a number over the coming years, because he backed himself in on campaigning for transparency and integrity. as did Prime Minister Albanese. The Teals know that, the crossbench knows that. That's what they campaign on, and that's why they too are sitting there wondering what the government is doing internally. Well, we've got our answer today. They've decided that Penny Wong, the Foreign Minister, should run Immigration and Home Affairs.
Yeah, and I mean, talking of immigration, of course, we have this other whole issue is, once you get here, where are y'all gonna live here? And this is the data that we had today in the paper from the Institute of Public Affairs, reported by my colleague James Campbell at the Sunday Telegraph. 148,000 new dwellings, 148,000 new houses, 22-23. 528,000 net overseas migrants. Now, I'm a migrant myself. The accent gives it away. But there have got to be limits here on this. Clearly, let's start with you, James Ashby, here. This whole issue of housing and migration, if we don't, the pro-migration people say, if we don't keep bringing in the people, our economy is going to go in the toilet. What's your answer to that criticism, James?
Well, they've never openly admitted to that, James. That is the honest truth, though. Part of our GDP, a large proportion of it now, and increasing under the current government, is this reliance on bringing people in from other countries to try and boost the economy. Because when they come here, they come empty-handed, like most migrants, and they've got to go and buy a whole heap of things to go and then put into their house or, buy a new car. And that's what's boosting that GDP in the country. The problem is, though, as you've rightfully pointed out, we don't have the homes. We've got 122,000 Australians currently either homeless or living in cars, living in tents under bridges here in Brisbane, in Queensland, and the Labor government just do not seem worried about this. We've got an amazing number of homes that are left empty, brand new homes that is, that have been bought mostly in cities across our country, and these have been bought up by foreigners and have been left idle, and there is nothing to stop them doing that under the current scheme. What we need is a complete ban on foreign investment into the housing sector at this present moment. If you're a student, you don't need to buy a house if you're only here for a 3 or 4 year time to get yourself an education. Number one, stop the students from being able to buy properties in this climate and in this country. That'll solve a great deal of the issues. But, as for this government, they want to keep us out of a recession. Maybe we need to go back to Keating's philosophy, and maybe it's the recession we need to have. Stop the immigration numbers at the level they're having. Let's have a look at the true nature of our economy as it sits, because right now both the Liberal government and Labor government have done a bloody poor job.
Well, and Nicole, let's come to you on this here. This is going to be a huge issue. It's going to be a big issue in the next election. Previously, the Liberals, the coalition, had said, we're going to need more people, and now, of course, the pressure's on them to turn it around. Is James right? Does there need to be something done about foreign ownership? We all hear these anecdotal stories of people trying to buy properties, and some shadowy bidder on the phone winds up beating them out at the last minute. Are we doing enough with our Foreign Investment Review Board work, and do the rules need to be tightened?
I think we definitely need to have another look at it, James. We did tighten it when I was in Parliament, but I'm not sure that it's working as well as it should. I just want to take James Ashby to task, though. I am very concerned, he just said, perhaps we need another recession we had to have. Over my dead body, I lived through it. My parents lived through it. Farmers around the nation lived through it. And small businesses, people lost their businesses and their homes. James, that's a really terrible thing to say. Please don't never say that again. And as
no
I said in my
one wants to see it, Nicole, but the reality is people are living outside of their means, including government. And that's the biggest issue that we're seeing right now. Government are living outside of their means, and so are the Australian public in so many circumstances. So it's not what I want to see, but perhaps it would reset.
You're going to are you mansplaining me? Are you mansplaining now?
Let's bring Christy.
He might be, Nicole. He might be.
Christy,
he might be mansplaining.
Is there a point, though, in all of this, so that we need, Christy, to increase our actual productivity of making things and producing things and creating and generating wealth in this country, rather than just generating property values? Christy.
Well, it's impossible to generate productivity and improve efficiency of the Australian workforce with the union-dominated industrial relations agenda. We've seen just about every single industrialised sector go out against it. And of course, they can't do that publicly because they've had to sign non-disclosure agreements in order to talk about industrial relations with the government. So productivity and efficiency is never going to be improved in this country as long as we run quite a prohibitive industrial relations agenda. That's not to say industrial relations isn't necessary. Of course it is. It just doesn't have to be so weighted to one side as we're seeing now. In terms of foreign investment, it's an easy target. But I want to point the other side of the coin here is that if Australia limits foreign investment, it limits the incentive of the property industry to build new stock. We have taxed foreign investors significantly on buying properties. It doesn't matter. They will still buy it. And part of that is Australia employs hundreds of people around the world in our trade offices to sell Australia as a package. Come here, be part of our $26 billion international education sector, buy a property, bring your relatives, and this is how skilled migration is facilitated, and this is how Australia has an influx of foreign investment. So it's a double-edged sword there. Limiting foreign investment means limiting the incentives of developers to build.
Hey, I just want to end that there just for a second. I want to ask Nicole just about one last issue before we go on to the break here. Nicole, tell us very quickly, because some people here might have missed it, about the South Australian voice vote and what happened with this and the tiny numbers of people that wound up voting to get people into this new committee, this new voice, which is a tiny version of what we almost got saddled with last year, Nicole.
Well, James, this is an absolute shocker, and thank you to you and Rowan and Rita for having Ben Hood MLC on Outsiders this morning. Please look up the interview. Ben gave a really good overview of the abomination that's unfolded here in SA. Only 10% of eligible Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voters bothered to vote for candidates for the new voice. Some people were elected apparently with 0 votes or 6 votes. This thing's going to cost South Australian taxpayers at least $10.3 million over the next 4 years. And I say at least because we do not know what the true cost will be. And, put this in perspective, local government elections here in SA, we had a turnout in 2022 of 34.5%. That's not compulsory voting, but a third of eligible people still turned up. So the biggest concern, though, aside from the cost and the lack of representation, is the impact on democracy, because the SA voice can challenge any piece of legislation going through SA Parliament. So we may well end up with what we were concerned about federally, which is democracy being stopped in its tracks and held to ransom by a very small number of people on The Voice who were elected by only 2,700 South Australians.
Wow. All right, we have to leave that there, Nicole. We're going to come back with our fiery panel after the break. They're going to get not going anywhere, and neither should you. And we cannot wait to see what one Greens MP's problem is with this Victorian icon, the Puffing Billy. God, these Greens. Anyway, see you in the break. Welcome back to the program. James Morrow here, filling in for Paul Murray Live on this Easter Sunday here. We've got 3 great panelists who will be with us back in a moment on this Easter Sunday. But first, I know we all think of Javier Milei as the swashbuckling go-to South American leader who's taking on the swamp. But he may have some competition from this man, Mohammed Irfan Ali, president of Guyana, who agreed to sit down with the BBC's Stephen Sakur and gave what I think is an absolute masterclass in how to school a condescending journalist. Roll the tape.
That means, according to many experts, more than 2 billion tons of carbon emissions will come from your seabed, from those reserves, and be released into the atmosphere. I don't know if you, as a head of state, went to the COP in Dubai.
Let me stop you right there. Do you know that Guyana has a forest forever that is the size of England and Scotland combined? a forest that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon, a forest that we have kept alive, a forest that we have kept alive.
Does that give you the right? Does that give you the right to release all of this carbon?
Does that give you the right to lecture us on climate change? I am going to lecture you on climate change because we have kept this forest alive that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon that you enjoy, that the world enjoy, that you don't pay us for, that you don't value, that you don't see a value in, that the people of Guyana has kept alive. Guess what? We have the lowest deforestation rate in the world. And guess what? Even with our greatest exploration of the oil and gas resource we have now, we will still be net zero.
That was absolutely brutal stuff there. There was more to that tape, but if I showed you any more of that clip, they'd make me give a distressing content warning. Now, let's get back into it with Chris McSweeney, James Ashby, and Nicole Flint. Christy McSweeney, what do you reckon about politicians like this who give it to journalists who come in with their assumptions about what they should be doing and really just absolutely school them?
Well, I just wanted to say Guyana has just found that it's going to be the next source of oil in the region. People are talking about it becoming the next Kuwait. It has a population of just 800,000. So ExxonMobil is facilitating the exploration of Guyana and it's newly discovered. So this Prime Minister there, or President, I'm not sure what his moniker is about to become extremely wealthy and extremely important. So important, the fact that Venezuela actually has territorial rights to Guyana and they haven't been too interested in wanting them back, but they now want to exercise those territorial rights. So he's got a lot of challenges on his hand. And I think worrying about climate change in an interview with the BBC is the least of his issues at the moment. And I think that is absolutely fantastic. And if that journalist knew anything about the economic position of his country, he would not have led with climate change.
Well, how many times have we all seen out there, those journalists who go out there and do not show any evidence of having done the reading? But anyway, that's why you're watching Sky News, where we do the reading. And I want to talk about, speaking of news, big changes that Meta, they're the guys behind Facebook, are making, where they're saying that they are going to basically change the way they present news. And there's a lot of people sounding the alarm that this is going to hurt Australian democracy because this is how people get their political content. Michelle Rowland, Communication Minister, said that in a thriving democracy, having access to free media and proper journalism that is subject to scrutiny and standards is fundamental. This in response to Meta basically saying, we're only going to show you political content you agree with, or we're going to limit it, and you got to opt in to get it. Nicole Flint, how concerned are you that these social media giants like Meta are trying to dial up and down the amount of content that we're allowed to receive through their platforms?
I'm hugely concerned, James, but not just about that. I'm just concerned about how these big tech social media companies conduct themselves generally. So online safety for children, for adults, particularly for women. I've been very outspoken about this for a number of years. We haven't seen it fixed. They've just said that they're going to stop paying Australian media companies for content that they use or reproduce, which is just reprehensible and deeply unfair. And now it sounds like they're, I guess in a sense, censoring what people will be able to read or what will pop up on their feed. So this is all bad for democracy, bad for the nation, and quite frankly, it is well and truly past time for the government and also for the coalition. We should have done more when we were in Parliament last time. Believe me, it wasn't through me, through lack of trying on my behalf. They have to be held to account. We don't tolerate the sort of behaviour that we see from these big tech companies from any single other company or business that operates in Australia. Please refer back to my valedictory speech in February 2022 when I said they are behaving in the sort of manner that companies did way back in the 18th century Britain, and governments did legislate then to fix things. We have to bring them into line. They have to be held to the same sort of standards that we expect of every single other corporation.
And James Ashby, I mean, One Nation and Pauline Hanson makes these wonderful videos that go out every Friday morning. The Pauline Hanson Please Explains, which always are, when I know sort of the weekend is beginning when I see those pop up. And they're vastly entertaining. But, you know, your experience with the social media companies as One Nation, you know, do you agree that there's a real problem with the way that these organizations, these giants, are meddling with what people can see and do and so on, especially around democracy?
Oh, let's face it, social media were very clever. Facebook initially, as a social media platform, they opened the lives of so many people and, you know, allowed you to share all this content, got billions of people on their platform, did it all for nothing, and then certain years later, only a few years later, put the squeeze on. And I know, as you say, with those cartoons, we see them throttle cartoon content. We see them throttle conservative content, things that might be a little bit risque. They use algorithms that silence words like suicide or eating disorders. So they actually play down those things, all in the meanwhile happy to take money from scam artists from across the globe who are happy to take tens of millions of dollars every month from Australians who fall sucker to these scams that are performed on their platform. And you know what? When Pauline Hanson is seen along solar panels trying to, she's not promoting this, by the way, it's some scam artist. Yeah. People click into it, buy it. When you try and take action against Facebook and say to them, listen, will you deal with this? Nothing to be heard from. And we've got billionaires in the same category here in this country that have been trying to solve this problem as well. And Facebook, Meta do nothing about it. It's a real shame.
Look, I think you're right. And frankly, if I saw an ad with Pauline Hanson selling solar panels, I'd be asking, please explain myself. But,
no, she's not.
Yeah, no, I know, please. But anyway, but Christy McSween, let's bring you in on this too, because there's been all of this conversation around the great social researcher, Jonathan Haidt. He's got a new book out called The Anxious Generation, and it's all about the effect of smartphones and what they're doing to our kids. He's used Pew Research that found in 2015, 1 in 4 teens was online almost constantly, sounds like me, and that in 2022 that rose to 46%. There's all of this concern around basically since 2007 when all these platforms really got started. Mental health of teens has gone off a cliff. Christy McSweeney, do you think that this needs to be regulated? Should there be, you know, maybe even an age requirement saying, you know, you need to be 16 or 18 before you can log on to these things?
Well, what's really interesting, talking about the things that the tech platforms do that nobody knows they do. I worked with an online safety company. They're actually the 3rd or 4th biggest in the world in internet parental filter controls. When you have a family account with Apple and your children are under 13 years of age and they all sign into that family account so you can monitor it, that's really useful, and parents think Apple's doing something amazing. But what they don't know is that when that child turns 13, that child is actually notified by Apple whether or not they want to opt out of that family account. So 13 is the age that Apple deems children able to make their own decisions about what they access on the internet. We know children accessing pornographic and violent material younger and younger and younger. Reports are that it begins at age 8 now. So shocking. The harm, the social issues, domestic violence, normalisation of sexual things that children should not see leads to all sorts of behaviours. And Nicole's right. I want to echo her point there. The Coalition did not do enough when they had their initial inquiry into the tech platforms. Why? Because they were bullied, the same sort of corporate bullying we are seeing now, and they were too scared to make those decisions.
Yeah, James Ashby, I notice you shaking your head there. What do you think about all of this and the issue with kids, you know, being exposed to all sorts of stuff that's really, you know, fairly adult? I mean, 13 is pretty young to be, you know, allowed out into the wilds of the internet on your own, don't you think?
Yeah, we're seeing this beyond just social media. You know, if a kid runs away from home now, police are reluctant to remove a child from some other household they might be living in because at 13 they're old enough to make that decision for themselves. But this is the other issue that we're seeing here in Queensland. Crime rates have actually skyrocketed because a lot of these kids are actually out there posting their illegal activities online to actually earn social credit points with their Yahoo mates out there. And this is driving a great deal of crime problems throughout Queensland, and it's all been exacerbated by the social media platforms, namely Meta. They've got a lot to answer for.
No, they do. And I know the Coalition has put forward legislation, I think, to kind of strengthen, Nicole, some of the penalties and back up the states on that. Nicole?
Yes, yeah. Peter Dutton has shown fantastic leadership on this issue, and the Coalition has taken a very strong position on a range of social media issues over the course of this year, and we're just waiting for the Labor Party to catch up. But yes, to precisely the point that James Ashby just made, we've got to stop these kids from being able to brag about their criminal activity online, which just encourages them and all of their mates to do it more. It's devastating what's happening, particularly in Queensland, I think country New South Wales, and also Victoria. Crime is out of control. That's what Labor governments have delivered.
And we're seeing this out in country New South Wales too. The Daily Telegraph's done some huge series on that as well recently. But, you know, I spoke in the editorial at the start of the show about how it's now, you know, March holiday season. Well, it seems like, you know, we're taking down our March holiday season lights and getting our Anzac Day Culture War decorations up already because Woolworths, it looks like, didn't learn their lesson from Australia Day. They are going to snub another sacred day in the calendar, not stocking commemorative Anzac Day tins. Now, veterans have told 2GB Radio just what they thought about this. Have a listen.
I collect those tins and value them greatly because of my association. And I'm very, very sorry to hear that Woolworths won't do it. Such a small thing for such a big shopping conglomerate to do.
I would have thought so.
I don't think it is very, very much to ask them to continue what they've done for some quite a time.
Christy McSweeney, did they not learn their lesson? Isn't that big sort of, you know, empty space where Brad Banducci's name used to be on the CEO's door teach them anything? Is
even Anzac Day. I cannot believe it. Of anything, this is the day that Australians hold so dear in our national psyche. It is pretty disgraceful. It doesn't cost Woolies a lot of money to produce that sort of merchandise. It absolutely doesn't. No doubt they will say there's efficiency and cost pressures and supply chain issues.
Sure.
Just do it, Woolies.
It's pretty straightforward. James Ashby?
They're just wankers, James, honestly. Didn't they learn a lesson from Australia Day? The issue here, Woolworths don't only hurt their own shareholders and their own store and their staff, but every other tenant that is in shopping centres across supermarkets in this country get affected too, because when my mum and I don't shop at Woolworths, I don't shop at the local butcher that's in the same complex, I don't shop at the newsagent there, and I don't shop at the other stores that are surrounding them. So they're not only hurting themselves, but they're also hurting every single other tenant in that shopping centre. They should rethink this, and are they Australian as a company or are they not? And if they are, start thinking about supporting Australian issues and those days that matter most to us.
James Ashby, we're going to have to leave it there, but I think your wankers comment, summed it up. James Ashby, Nicole Flint, Christy McSweeney, thank you so much. Happy Easter to all of you, and see you again soon on Paul Murray Live. Now, don't go anywhere because Andrew Bogut, is coming up just after the break. Well, welcome back to Paul Murray Live. There's a lot of news in the AFL at the moment, and some real soul-searching is going on. I want to bring in former NBA star Andrew Bogut to discuss this. Andrew, let's talk about this soul-searching after allegations levied in Parliament by Andrew Wilkie about drug testing. Now, obviously, these are all allegations, and we don't know the truth yet, but as a former athlete and someone who worked in environments like these, what would the impact of a story like this have on players and even potentially the future of the sport?
Well, it's not good. I mean, there'll be a lot of players that are obviously innocent that are going to get tarnished with the same brush. But, you know, in circles, at least in Melbourne, when I spent time there, when I was younger, I used to frequent nightclubs and bars. you could clearly see blokes that weren't drinking all night having a very good time. It seemed like they were having, a buzzing time. If you know
A
what
bit
I mean.
too much
Everyone
fun,
knew-
maybe? Yeah.
Yeah, everyone knew what was going on, but people were asking questions as to how are they passing the drug test, because they're obviously taking something at the nightclubs, right?
Yeah.
And all you need to look into is the federal funding that the AFL receives. Part of it is because they're part of WADA, which is SADA, the drug testing code. That comes from federal government money back in the day, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, right, when it was all implemented. So obviously the AFL knows they've got an issue in-house, right? So they're going to do what they can to make sure none of that gets out. So how do they do that? Well, the news has been broken, right? This is not surprising to me whatsoever. This is like telling me that Santa Claus isn't real. It's not surprising.
So, I mean, if these allegations around, basically, I think there's claims that people faked injuries to get out of drug tests and things like that if they thought they were going to test positive. These are just the allegations that are out there. But if these things are proven, well, there's a lot of money that's on the line for that. And it would have been seeming, like you're messing with this whole system that's been set up. Where would the AFL go with this, or where would they go, both politically and legally, to get out from under this cloud?
Where do you start? That's the issue. Like, how deep does it go? It affects everything. It affects sports betting, for instance, definitely, because you've got a player that's you thought was playing, it's a star player, it's now out with a hamstring. But it's just funny that it's the one organisation, the AFL, they like to preach to us about everything politically, who you should vote for, yes vote, no vote, different kind of themed rounds, pushing political agendas. And they're probably the biggest hypocrites in the Australian sporting landscape as of today.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people will not miss the irony of all of that sort of moralism and hectoring and different sort of identity politics days that come down at us. But let's move to another AFL question, and that's around the Brisbane Lions. They were supposed to be one of the premiership favourites, but they haven't won so far this year, and people are pointing to the fallout from an end-of-season trip where the story goes that internal messages have been seen by wives and girlfriends. Doesn't sound great. Again, one of those, we don't know where the truth is. But again, where does this go with this club? And are these professional athletes good enough to push through this sort of controversy?
Yeah, I'm going to shock a lot of people here and say that's in most sporting teams, much ado about nothing.
Yeah.
The fact that Australian media is blowing this up, like, this is the reason why they're playing bad. Let me give you a tip. It happens a lot on the road, happens a lot in different sporting codes. There's players indulge in it. There's players that sit in their rooms and play PlayStation. That's just the reality of teams. So if you're shocked by that, I hate to break it to you, it happens pretty much on every road trip for every football team, cricket team, basketball team. There's always a few blokes that like to go out and have some fun. And that's up to them. They're adults. If it's their marriage in jeopardy, that's their problem.
Andrew Bogut, I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much. I'm so disabused of this notion that everybody in professional sports are not actually angels when it comes to what happens off the field. Thank you so much, Andrew Bogut. Now, don't go anywhere. The Royal Report is on in a few minutes, and I'll be back with another thought after the break. Welcome back to Paul Murray Live. James Morrow here for Paul, who will be back tomorrow night. Now, one last story grabbed my eye I want to share with you before we go. The ABC has been absolutely slammed by its own ombudsman over an ABC RMIT fact check that inaccurately claimed legendary businessman Dick Smith had unfairly rubbished renewable energy because he is in favor of nuclear power. Now, Sophie Ellsworth from The Australian has reported tonight that in a 2-page finding published late last week, the ABC Ombudsman Fiona Cameron determined that the fact checkers, quote, had inaccurately asserted that Mr. Smith's support for nuclear-generated power meant that he rejected renewable-led electricity generation in the process. The Ombudsman went on to say that we think the RMIT ABC fact check should have exercised more caution before fact-checking a potentially equivocal statement about renewables, and finished by saying that the broadcast by the ABC breached the media's organization's editorial standards for accuracy. Can't say clearer than that. Over to you, Paul Barry at Media Watch. Oh, and by the way, one last tiny story. In the meantime, before we get to Carol Dundrusa with the Royal Report, the puffing Billy in Victoria, well, the Greens have decided that they don't like that because it emits carbon, and they would much rather have that money spent on arts. Well, can't say anything more about the Greens than that. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Paul Murray back tomorrow night. And coming up here, Caroline DeRusso with the Royal Report.